I think so. Yeah, I think I'll be okay. Thank you so much, Aviva, and it's such a pleasure to be here, and what a beautiful service. I'm hoping this brings me one step closer to my kids forgiving me for not taking them to Taylor Swift, but we'll see. All right. So it's hard for me to think about paths to social justice without thinking about the philosopher Bell Hooks, who transformed my understanding of social change from my first exposure to her work in the early 1990s. She captured the complex realities of fighting for a better and just society. She wrote, "Justice demands integrity. It's to have a moral universe, not only know what is right or wrong, but to put things in perspective, weigh things. Justice is different from violence and retribution. It requires complex accounting." After 20 years of working towards social change as a physician, and this year more than ever, this complex accounting is exactly what I find myself grappling with. Today, I'll speak to the difficult path of social justice, to the discomfort, the unease, the hard work of social justice. This week's Parsha Toledot speaks powerfully to this, but we'll get there. So in 2005, I helped lead an advocacy campaign to raise social assistance rates. We organized physicians and other health providers to sign forms for people living on social assistance to provide them with a special diet supplement. This little-known addition to social assistance provides up to $250 per month in extra income for health-related dietary needs. And the few people receiving the supplement up to that point had conditions like diabetes and high cholesterol and received $30 to $40 per condition. We made the decision, however, to draw on the strong body of evidence linking poverty with adverse health outcomes to justify diagnosing people living on less than $700 per month with poverty as a health condition, and to prescribe the maximum $250 per month to each of them. We did this publicly as part of a political action campaign without promise it would continue long term, but it was seen by many people living in poverty as a godsend and as a deep acknowledgement of the desperation of their situations. Not all reactions were as welcoming. The provincial government attacked us, and City Councillor Rob Ford lectured us on the need for physicians to stay in our lane. Those critiques I wore with pride, if a little trepidation given the province is my boss. My fellow physicians' reactions were harder to face. I was a new family doctor at the time, a year or so out of residency, and newly appointed as staff at my hospital and as a faculty at the university. My colleagues had been my teachers, supervisors, and mentors, my guides to being an effective physician, and in many cases, the reason I was constructing a practice focused on socially marginalized people in downtown Toronto. They included, by the way, my friend and mentor Philip Berger, who spoke here a few weeks ago. I felt vulnerable and sensitive to the whispers, the sidelong glances, and the insinuations that I was enabling fraud. My nascent reputation in the medical and academic communities was certainly on the line, and this made me nervous. I decided to trust my gut, though. While we were in a bit of a gray zone, we justified our actions with evidence, and we drew strength from the powerful, positive response from the community of people we were supporting and advocating with. That campaign was exciting, fun, physically draining, scary, and uncomfortable. When I could have just been enjoying the emergence from years of hard training, my wedding, my new daughter who arrived in the midst of all this, and just being a young working person in Toronto, I had put myself in ethical and social gray zones. Was I right to take those actions, to choose that path? I wasn't sure. The answer wasn't obvious or clear. Many I respected thought I was misguided, but I went with my best guess at the right thing to do. Almost 20 years later, my colleagues and much of my medical community have come on side. Recognition of the need to address poverty and other social risks to health is much more widespread. We have multiple supports built into our team to deal with our patients' social marginalization, and we engage in the challenging work of addressing racism and other structural inequities faced by our patients. I'm pretty sure it was right to weather those early challenges and that early criticism, but it took a lot of hard work, caused a good bit of uncertainty and emotional pain. So let's turn to Toledot, this week's Parsha. I have to say, it doesn't feel like mere coincidence that I was offered this date to speak. A few years ago, we were offered Toledot for our younger kids' bar mitzvah. They're right there. They love being called out. It was a story of twins for our twins. We desperately wanted them to engage with this story, but COVID made us shift to a spring event with a different Parsha. So fate seems to have led me back here. And this story is a zinger. I don't spend a lot of time contemplating Torah, but this Parsha kept me engaged beginning to end. So it focuses on Jacob and Esau, twin sons of Rebekah and Isaac. Now, these brothers are remarkably different and fight with each other from their time in Rebekah's womb. Before their birth, God declares that the younger, who turns out to be Jacob, will rule over the elder. This reversal of birth hierarchy is reinforced some years later when Esau, after a hard period of work, tired and hungry and thirsty, comes to his brother to ask for food and drink. In a pretty ethically suspect move, in my opinion, Jacob convinces Esau to give up his birthright, meaning his rights to land and power as a firstborn before feeding him. Later, and here the story gets even more twisted, an aging Isaac declares that he intends to bestow his blessing on his favored son, Esau, as leader of the Jews. Rebekah believes this is wrong and against God's will, and she happens to like her other son better. She helps Jacob trick Isaac using some delicious venison stew and goatskin clothing to make Jacob feel hairy like his brother, and Isaac gives the blessing to Jacob instead. Esau's understandably angry and threatens to kill Jacob, so Rebekah sends Jacob far away to marry while Esau cools down. So I can see how this story has generated centuries of ethical and moral debate. Did Jacob take advantage of Esau's weak state to steal his birthright? Was it fair of Rebekah to deceive an old blind man in order to instill the son she felt most worthy of being leader of the Jews? Was Esau's murderous anger reasonable? Was God right to declare one son, and perhaps by extension Esau's descendants, as subservient to another? And is this all best for society and for their people? I do believe these characters made choices based on their sense of what was right, what was just, and what was best for their community. What I am sitting with today, though, is the struggle they experience as they find their path to what they feel is right. All four central characters are caught in spaces of ambiguity, and all of them say and do things that are morally and ethically questionable, but that they feel are right. I sense a drive towards an outcome that's best for their communities, their people, but a real struggle to figure out what is the best path there. In many cases, they prioritize doing what's right over protecting even their closest personal relationships. It can't be easy for Rebecca or Isaac to explicitly favor one child. I can't imagine Jacob, held up as one of our great forebears, twice stole his twin brother's future without at least some twinges of self-doubt. This all makes me profoundly uncomfortable. We repeat the names of Rebecca, Isaac, Jacob every week in prayers. They are held up as saints. I've never considered them as humans, with human imperfections, questionable decision-making, struggles, failings. I'm disappointed and angry at many of their actions. Must I just accept that the final outcome was the intended one? Is the end result fair? And does it ultimately harm or hurt our self-perception as Jews? It's a messy story, but familiar, especially to the work of social justice. I've spent many, many hours this year reflecting on the ambiguity of my work and of my views of what's just, on how hard it is to stay focused on a goal that feels right when my actions generate strife and discord, when it is so emotionally hard to stay the course, and when personal relationships are threatened by the path I've chosen. I felt this in my anti-poverty work, but never as acutely as now. Let me go back a couple of years. In 2021, I spent 2 weeks as a doctor at my kids' Jewish summer camp. This space, built by an old left-wing Zionist youth movement, was very familiar to me. Unfamiliar, though, was a group of Jewish and Palestinian Israeli teens on a program called Heart to Heart. These 15-year-olds were there to build bridges to peace through listening, discussing, and challenging conceptions and stereotypes. Now that spring, there'd been a huge outbreak of fighting in Gaza. I was nervous. I imagined the whole situation exploding. I saw the potential for that acute situation to cause the Heart to Heart program to disintegrate, and for my children to be swept into it. Being kids, though, those 15-year-olds beautifully navigated their way through. They talked about their experiences, their fears, their senses of injustice and its grounding in history, their politics, their family members cowering from bombs and serving in the army. Then they hung out, talked music, played sports, laughed, and became friends. Watching them, I felt some of the struggle of being a critical Zionist melt away. After years of despair at the occupation, I saw a path towards peace, maybe even reconciliation. I saw hints of a future in which Israelis raised on dialogue could grab control of the country again and save it from its turmoil. I could support this program and help build that path to peace. Of course, October 7th intervened. After high school, I spent 9 months on a kibbutz in the Gaza envelope. As was true for many of us, October 7th hit very close to home for me. I was devastated by the brutality of what Hamas did and by being able to see myself right there in the spaces and with the people affected. Within a few weeks, though, the Israeli response and its impact on Palestinians in Gaza pushed its way into my consciousness as well. In late October of last year, I attended a Jewish vigil for those killed on both sides. We sang songs, said the Kaddish, read poems for peace. We cried. We spoke out against war. We centered humanity, life, and community. By November, despite feeling discomfort with the rising movements against Israel, the trapping of thousands of health workers and patients inside Al-Shifa Hospital drove me to look for a space to express my discomfort with the impacts of war on the innocent people in Gaza. This was hard. I attended a large rally on University Avenue and stood near the edge with other Jews, listening to the slogans calling for a free Palestine and witnessing the anger, the fear, the desperation, and the sadness of participants. This was an uncomfortable space. Some of what I was hearing, I had been told, was anti-Semitic and extremist. But this space was amplifying a call for peace I wasn't hearing from most Jews. It wasn't a comfortable fit, but the message felt closer to my need to see an end to innocent death than the alternative. I was wary of the magnifying glass put on Israel in some activist circles. I was sensitive to the possibility that an intense focus on Israel can tip into anti-Semitism. So I decided to work to build space with other Jews to discuss our reactions to the devastation in Gaza. Sadly, in questioning the Israeli response to October 7th, I was quickly ostracized. I say nothing in private, public, or on social media questioning Israel's right to exist or to reasonably defend itself. I share my long history of engagement with Israel and with Zionism. I am also clear that I cannot stand behind the death of tens of thousands of innocent people or the destruction of a society and its infrastructures of health and education and social support. I've never suggested I have answers, but I have consistently suggested we need to talk about the realities of what is going on and about our relation to those realities. The Jewish medical community especially closed its ranks. Social media chat groups kicked me out. I was denied entry into an organization for Jewish physicians in Ontario through McCarthyist grilling by a panel of physicians and a lawyer. I was actively silenced in meetings of Jewish colleagues by people I considered friends. There was an easier path here. I could have joined my fellow Jews in solidarity, stood with my Jewish colleagues and with the majority of my community, but that didn't and doesn't feel right to me. I'm not claiming to be right, but I am claiming to follow a path towards what I feel is just. And this is where this past year's story meets my early experiences with anti-poverty work. To work towards a socially just world often requires grappling with profound discomfort, both internally and externally. It means facing contradictions in ourselves, challenges to our self-identity, to our privilege, to our relationships. And it can cause conflict in relationships that can be incredibly painful. Don't get me wrong, I've found wonderful community through the work that I do. I've found many people, many Jews, many allies and friends who want to work together on the difficult path I see to social justice. And I maintain many friendships with people who hold different views to me. I recognize we all live with complexity in our views and choices and positions. Let's look back to Toledot. Esau was angry, but he didn't kill Jacob. Isaac and Rebekah stayed married. Jacob came back to lead the Jews. I'm guessing they all spent many years tormented by the choices they made, but they chose to live with discomfort in the hope of finding the right path forward. So my hope is that we draw on that willingness to take risk, to live with ambiguity, choose paths based on a careful assessment of what feels right to build a world that is more just, more fair, more peaceful. And I hope that we are willing to push for this greater good even when we are challenged by our friends and by those we love. This, to me, is the hard work of social justice. If we don't feel uncomfortable, if we aren't challenging ourselves, our colleagues, our communities, if we don't feel uncertainty, and if we don't get lost in the complexity of the issues we're grappling with, we aren't deeply engaged enough. Working towards social justice, by its nature, challenges our sense of who we are, our positions of privilege, the structures and assumptions and histories we fall back on for comfort and safety. Those challenges are exciting, necessary, and hard, difficult, and painful work. So this is my lesson from Toledot. The path to what feels right is not always a path that feels easy or good or comfortable. And to advance social justice, we must embrace and grapple with and accept that discomfort as a necessary part of finding our path to what we feel is just.